This event today celebrates multicultural and global Shakespeare, Shakespeare in all its forms. This particular day is also the launch of the British Black and Asian Shakespeare Performance Database, which currently contains 1,194 productions of Shakespeare's plays to which a Black or Asian performer or other personnel have contributed. Although we've leaked it to the press, this is effectively the moment where we throw champagne up against its bow and christen it the rather lengthy name I've just said. It's just a minor detour into the fact that there's not really great Wi-Fi here apparently, so it's PowerPoint, but there are bookmarkers and you can play with it all you want later. So, what does it do? It was conceived by Tony Howard as a celebration of performances by Black and Asian actors from Paul Robeson to 2010. So the first thing the database highlights is the growing participation of Black and Asian actors in Shakespearean production. This includes stage and increasingly film and television roles, and although information is still being added to it on a weekly basis, it is inevitably incomplete. And inevitably, there are productions that are not in here because I've concentrated on those that can be verified through programs, press accounts, or theater history sources. So its strength really lies in the 1980s on. In building this database, I have concentrated on several layers of theatrical production. The productions of the top 3 players in the Shakespeare industry, the Royal Shakespeare Company, the National Theatre, and most recently Shakespeare's Globe Theatre are included, obviously. Their educational programs are also embedded in the database. Regional theatre has not been neglected, and in fact is one of the unsung heroes of championing diversity in its productions. In the 1980s, directors outside of London were more frequently casting Black or Asian actors in Shakespeare than other companies with a higher profile. Where they can be verified, fringe productions have also been added. So before we get onto the facet of the database that's made the headlines recently, let's first recognize that it celebrates performances and productions that have been overlooked or forgotten or simply unacknowledged by theater historians. For example, did you know that Sam Dastor played Ariel to Paul Schofield's Prospero in 1974? Possibly not, because it was in Leeds, at what was then the Leeds Playhouse. John Barber, in the Daily Telegraph, wrote of him, "The elegant Ariel of Sam Dastor becomes magical because as this Prospero speaks to him, he seems to be marveling at his acquaintance with so light and delicate a spirit." Another unmentioned fact, not unlike what Tony said earlier of Anne Othello, is that long before Jude Kelly's famous photo-negative production of Othello with Patrick Stewart in the title role in Washington, D.C., yes. A photo-negative production was staged at the Barons Court Theatre in 1992. You can see from the photograph what you would expect to see, a black man and a white man. And it's a pose that looks very much like Iago putting his poison in Othello's ear, but in fact, that is Jami Michaels as Iago, and the white actor is Christopher Toba playing Othello. So now, however, to the less comfortable part of the database, and the reason I'm standing here. What the clever designers did with it, with what is essentially a clunky piece of software, was to build in a roles counter, which tells us quite clearly what parts people have been cast in most often, and allowed me and you to gaze with ease at some statistics. For instance, let's take Romeo and Juliet to start with. With 88 productions of the play in the database so far, the most frequently cast role is Romeo, and tied in second place is Juliet with the nurse. So Romeo and Juliet, that's actually very positive, isn't it? Park that, we'll come back to it. Remember, the nurse, also, who is currently tied in second place with Juliet. The nurse, a servant. Okay, Romeo and Juliet. Moving on, Macbeth. Or as I prefer to call it, the Scottish play. Call them what you will, weird sister, which one, which. Black and Asian actors are more likely to get cast as the witch in Macbeth. I know there are 3 of them, But out of 76 productions, directors have cast them 55 times, entering them near the top of the unofficial black canon. So what about comedy? Much Ado About Nothing. Again, there is more than one member of the comedic watch, but they are sometimes anonymous, sometimes they're provided with names by directors, often inconsistently. They're always interchangeable unless they're Dogberry or Burgess. So, out of the 41 productions of Much Ado, the Watch are at the top of the casting tree currently in the database. And the rest of the top 5 consists of Claudio, this is in order, Claudio, Hero, Don Pedro, and Margaret. So let's parse that out a bit. Claudio has no family to speak of, so genetically he would not be related to anyone on the stage. He could be black, Asian, white, or related to Kermit the Frog. On the family front, Hero's a bit trickier. She is related to 3 people on the stage, and it has to be noted that sometimes a Bane Hero is paired with a Bane Leonato, her father. But she also has almost no lines. Next in line is Don Pedro. Now, the first time that I've found that this role was cast with a minority ethnic performer in the UK was in 1992, when Trevor Laird played the part in Alexandru Dari's multicultural production of Much Ado About Nothing for the Oxford Stage Company. A year later, this little-known film was released. Funnily enough, the unofficial black canon was greatly enhanced by the presence of Denzel Washington in the role of Don Pedro. So finally, in the top 5 roles for Much Ado About Nothing, we have Margaret, another servant. So I want to show you what that means in terms of how large the roles are in this play versus the roles that are most frequently played by black or Asian actors. So the largest roles in this play are, at number 1, Benedict, then Leonato, Don Pedro, Claudio, and Beatrice. Oh no, Beatrice high up on the list, who knew? The Watch are in 3 scenes, and individually they have fewer lines than Margaret. Then we have Hero, who has 5% of the lines. Claudio has 11% of the lines, Don Pedro with 12, and Margaret, a mere 2. So if we're talking about an unofficial black canon, then Claudio and Don Pedro are 2 of the better parts to get. But they're not the leads. And when you look at how many times Beatrice and Benedict have been played by Bane performers, it's pretty grim. It becomes easier to see distinct patterns in the creation of this niche casting canon, with 2 of Shakespeare's most infrequently performed plays, Troilus and Cressida, and The Two Gentlemen of Verona. And in a weird way, it feels like it's the Denzel Washington effect all over again, as at the height of casting young talent, both Patterson Joseph and Josette Bushell-Mingo made their mark in Troilus and Two Gents. Patterson Joseph played Patroclus in Sam Mendes' 1990 production of Troilus and Cressida, and Josette Bushell-Mingo played Lucetta in Two Gentlemen of Verona for David Thacker, also at the RSC in 1991. Since then, both roles have been cemented into place as roles that are frequently given to black or Asian performers. With the gradual cementing of this Shakespearean black canon, you can see these cynically as conforming to the types of media stereotypes of the best friend of a leading character, Achilles, and Lucetta, the maid. However, there are 2 key points that can help to illustrate how those 2 castings back in the 1990s were much more positive than what today seems like a cynical sticking a pin in a role because that's what's been done before. The first point to make is that both of these actors were at the beginning of their careers. The second, and little-known fact, is that Patterson Joseph and Josette Bushell-Mingo both went on to play the leads in these 2 productions, taking over from Ralph Fiennes and Saskia Reeves, respectively, when they left, playing Troilus, Patterson Joseph playing Troilus in Troilus and Cressida, and Josette Bushell-Mingo Sylvia in Two Gentlemen of Verona. So, the third point to make is visual. Let's start with this little blurry production photo from the fact there's two gents. So here you have Sean Murray and the then Richard, now Hugh Bonville, as servant and master, Speed and Valentine. Note, they are both dressed in evening wear. There are no class distinctions. This was typical of the other servant and master pair in the play, Lucetta and Julia. It might be a little, no it isn't. I thought it might be a little difficult to see in photo, but you can see the costumes, like the other pair. They're both in formal evening wear, both dressed in 1930s ball gowns, with the class distinctions of the text smoothed over in the costuming. The connotation in the scene was that the pair were friends who had gone to a ball together and had come out to the garden to have a little gossip. This was not the case over a decade later in 2004, with Fiona Buffini's production of Two Gentlemen of Verona, also at the RSC. Yes, that is Lucetta in a maid's outfit. From apparent equal, back to maid in the space of 13 years. Now, let's just have a little look at the casting of the leading roles of these two plays, or at least Troilus. With Troilus, we have 19 productions in the database currently. And it's worth noting also that the database does not record productions of, like Terry Hand's at Theatre Cluid or Andrew Hilton's at the Tobacco Factory in Bristol, that had no minority ethnic actors in them. So, out of these 19 productions, Cressida has been played by a minority performer 3 times. For Tara Arts, on the radio, and once at one of the big 3. We'll get onto that definition in a minute. Troilus has also been cast 3 times, played by 2 people. One was a takeover, one was on the radio, and the other was at the big 3, Peter Jersey in 1999. Now, it's worth looking at the context, sorry Patterson, of this, and it raises questions about radio, because it's not a visual medium. It raises questions about casting itself, as one of the performances was a takeover from a white actor who had originally been cast in the role. So how do you rate it when the understudy steps up? I don't know. Now, I'm actually being really harsh, in a way, on Sam Mendes to make a point, because thanks to Mendes, Patterson Joseph is the only black or Asian actor to play Troilus for the Royal Shakespeare Company. And not, I say again, not everybody, pretty much only the people know that are like weirdos like me who went to it 15 times. That's not how many times I saw it. So, given that Patterson Joseph wasn't hired to play Troilus, I'd say in this context, if you're looking at where and when and under what conditions BAME actors get hired, it needs a footnote. So that leaves us with the National Theatre's Troilus and Cressida as the only theater to have hired people of color to play the title characters in this play. Again, context is everything, and this is where the interesting phenomenon of setting rears its head again. Trevor Nunn conceived the production with white actors playing Greeks and black actors playing the Trojans, but as Daniel Rosenthal notes in the National Theatre story, this multiracial casting was devised when Nunn expected the ensemble's 6th play to be The Royal Hunt of the Sun. That never happened because Peter Schaffer withdrew the rights, making me wonder the unknowable. Would Nunn's production of Troilus and Cressida have been in the database at all? If it was, would it have had 2 minority leading actors? I want to say, with context, however, because the pre-publicity for this event and the launch of the database is focused on numbers to some extent, numbers aren't necessarily the problem. The problem is the fact that while large roles are being played by performers of color, they're not very frequently being played on the 5 large national stages at the 3 largest companies in the Shakespeare industry. To define that, at the RSC, it's the Royal Shakespeare Theatre and the Swan Theatre. At the National, it's the Littleton and the Olivier and Shakespeare's Globe Theatre. For context, again, let's look at Hamlet. This is without the Hamlet who is currently in rehearsals, so as we all know, the RSC is about to break its duck. But out of the 60 productions, the title role has been played 6 times in 5 productions, and not one of them meets my definition of the 5 most prominent national stages, the pinnacles of classical theater. I've also discounted tours and educational productions at the big 3 because if they play in the large houses, they tend to play for a couple of days and are not part of the regular repertory on the main stages. So for Hamlets, we have a performance in a pub, a tour of the world that basically doesn't play in the UK, an educational tour for schools, and we can argue the toss about Ben Kingsley and Buzz Goodbody's famous Hamlet and Adrian Lester's appearance for Peter Brook. But none of these are on our 5 main national stages, the ones that get all the attention and go down in the history books. So, let's stay on leading actors and actresses, of which there are a few of the latter. As with Hamlet, most plays have had at one time or another, no matter how under the radar the production is, a Black or Asian performer in its leading roles. But surprisingly, as I was looking this up for this lecture, there are still 3 plays where the title character has never been played by a member of an ethnic minority group. Coriolanus, Richard II, and Titus Andronicus. In a way, that's not surprising, given that the bulk of major castings for Bay performers leans heavily to the comedies and the 2 tragedies of Othello and Romeo and Juliet. Obviously, there are exceptions, but finding that out, that at the beginning of 2016, the year of our Lord, 400 after Shakespeare, there are leading roles that have never been tackled anywhere in this country by a Black or Asian performer. Which leads on to another question. In the 21st century, how many leading roles have been played on those same 5 national stages by an ethnic minority performer? I've defined leading roles by title characters, or the one with the most amount of lines. So there are obviously other theaters where this has happened. However, at the 5 stages I've said, this is it, ladies and gentlemen. 2000 to 2015. Fits nicely onto one slide. The men's roles are in red, and the women's roles are in blue, just to give you an indication of how little women get to work. There are 3 Othellos on this list, 1 Romeo at the beginning of the millennium, 2 Henry VIs, one of which was a revival of the history-making production, so I won't cynically finish this sentence, Adrian Lester's Henry V, 2 Pericleses, 2 Antiphili of Syracuse, a single bottom, I just had to actually put that in the speech, who, by the way, is on here because he's the largest role in the play. And for the women, it's 2 Juliets, 1 Beatrice in Mira and 1 each of Rosalind in As You Like It and Rosaline in Love's Labour's Lost. These are the leading roles and actors over the past 15 years at the top, the 3 at the top of the tree of the classical acting community. Industry. And these are the plays in the same period that have not had a BAME lead in the same 15 years. There are 4 codas to this. As You Like It has not had in Orlando, but has had, As You Like It's not had in Orlando since 1992, since Peter DeJersey played in For David Thacker at the RSC. But there was Rosalind was, I can't remember. Anyway, basically 4 plays have had 1, like, either male or female leading role, but not the other. As You, Comedy of Errors, Love's Labour's Lost has not had a Barone, but has had a Rosaline, and Measure for Measure has lacked in Isabella. Isabella. Josette Simon is Rosaline in this picture, but also Isabella in Measure for Measure. Josette Simon was the first Black actress to play a lead at the Royal Shakespeare Company. She played leads, in fact, twice in the 1980s, having worked her way up the food chain from the Maids and the Witches. Since, I mean, you know, young actors do. Since Josette Simon played Isabella in Measure for Measure, however, for Nicholas Heitner in 1987, there has not been a single ethnic minority actress to have played the part on a major stage. Josette Simon has not been seen on stage in a Shakespeare play since 1999. That's why her Titania, the RSC, is not on that slide. Because the show originated in Stratford in 1999 and only transferred to London in 2000. Josette Simon has not been cast in a Shakespeare play since 1999. I want to point that out because as much as the unofficial black canon functions as a glass ceiling for the men, for the women, it's impossible. While actresses of Josette Simon's caliber get to play these wonderful female, white actresses get to play these wonderful female roles in the canon almost in rotation, the door slammed shut for Josette Simon in 1999 for some reason. If the men are lucky, their career trajectory can be Romeo, Oberon, Othello, and one or two others in the canon. But the women, the Witch, Hippolyta, Titania, Calpurnia, and Julius Caesar, almost never a leading role. And while we're on this slide, one last point to make is the media hype. That's what these have in common. Hallelujah, they've been cast as leads, the first of their kind, the black performer playing a Shakespeare lead, in this case, the RSC. But nobody's come after Josette Simon as Isabella. Michael Boyd's 2006 revival aside, David Oyelowo has not been followed at either the Globe or in Trevor Nunn's infamous faux pas as Henry VI. And there has been no one but Adrian Lester to have played Henry V anywhere in this country. All of those media landmarks resulted in an impression that there was parity. Think about that for a minute. And contrast it with a gentleman by the name of Abraham Safar, a Burmese Jewish actor who had the kind of classical career that minority ethnic actors can apparently only dream of today. To name just a sliver of his CV, Safar played Barone in Love's Labour's Lost for Tyrone Guthrie at the Westminster Theatre in 1932. He played Bolingbroke at the Old Vic in 1934. Incidentally, he's the only minority ethnic actor to play the part professionally in this country, as far as I found. And in 1943, at the season at the Shakespeare Memorial Theatre, Safar played a number of parts, including Iago and a title role in King Lear. That would be true equality in casting, and it has to start happening again. We've missed out on so many potentially amazing performances because people like Josette Simon no longer seem to get the call. Thank you.